Hi, I'm going to share my story with you. I am a 43-year-old wife and mother, and I was diagnosed with ADHD in my early 20s. I don't really remember a whole lot about it. During that time, I self-medicated, and so I don't really remember a whole lot. I just know that I had went through some kind of assessment and they said that I was ADHD. Anyhow, this is a story about our journey. I've always had difficulties growing up. I was in a lot of physical altercations with people. Feisty child, very argumentative. Had a lot of problems in school. Had a problem with comprehending, reading. I was always very good at math. I excel at numbers. I love numbers. I find comfort in numbers. I like analyzing numbers. And so, of course, I became an accountant. It just made sense. When I was a little girl, I would play with a chalkboard, and I would play math all the time. I remember my grandmother Gigi, who's passed, and my great-grandmother at their campground, their trailer. I would sit on her steps with this little cute little chalkboard that she used to let me play with, and I would just sit on those steps, and I would sit there for hours just playing math, adding, subtracting, just writing numbers, writing patterns of numbers. And I remember her, before she recently passed away, I went and visited her. I'm so glad I was able to go. When my oldest daughter, had her child, and I got to see my grandson. He was 2 days old. And I stayed with my Gigi for the couple days that I was there. And she brought it up to me, and I had actually totally forgotten about it. And she's like, I always knew you were going to be a math teacher or an accountant or something to do with numbers. And I looked at her and I said, what do you mean? What do you mean by that? I was confused why she would say that. And she's like, because. And then she told me the story about me always playing math. Even when she lived in the basement downstairs, when we lived in Alaska, my daddy was military, and she moved in with us, and she used to live in the basement. I always thought it was cool because my Gigi lived in the basement, and I would go down there all the time and play with, because you could say play with Gigi, and I would brush her hair, and she had these rollers, and she told me I would constantly count the rollers, and then I would count them as I was putting them in her hair, and kind of do it like a song. And so she told me all these things, and I didn't think about it until recently. I went through some more assessments to figure out what's going on with me. So my son, he's 5. He has had trouble since the day he was born. He had trouble with food allergies. I had to make his formula homemade with rice milk. And I had to put nutrients in it. And because he couldn't drink or eat any of the formulas on the market, and he couldn't breastfeed either. He was allergic to me. So he just had a ton of food allergies, and for a year of his life, I had, from 1 year old to 2 years old, I had to make everything literally from scratch, and I still do for the most part. And so I knew it was going to be a challenge. We saw doctor after doctor after doctor after doctor after doctor, and I was so sick of seeing white coats in offices. Well, then our son, he's just a baby. He's, 12 months old, in the 12-month-old room at the daycare. And all the other 12-month-old babies are walking and running and playing, and my son's not even barely crawling. He's scooting, and he bit other children a lot as a defense because they're on their feet and he's on the ground, and he felt threatened because they kept getting in his space. And so I didn't think anything of it. And, we're like, oh, it's just a phase. And I went to my husband, like, well, do you think it's because he's not walking? Do you think he feels threatened and so he's biting? My husband's like, yeah, that makes sense. And so it was daddy boot camp at our house for like 2 weeks solid. And amazingly, my husband got our son on his feet, and he had a hard time. He was very clumsy. He's always had an issue with motor control. He wasn't talking yet. He would make some babbling sounds, but nothing made sense. Anyway, so we go on. We changed daycares, and he was having a hard time potty training, and the daycare person was starting to lose patience because Zayden started to show signs of aggression, and he would have meltdowns. And so we had to pull him out of that daycare. And we had a woman that we knew at a church that we went to, and she took him as an emergency case for a little bit, and bless her heart, he would have meltdowns on her. He was just a lot to handle, to be honest. And so we found a private preschool / daycare nursery at Step by Step here where we live in Florida. And I'm telling you, that place, although it was a hard journey to go down, the people there were so supportive. They're like our family, literally part of our family. And Zayden trusts them because they showed him that they were going to love him unconditionally, and they did not give up on him, which is huge for a child. We just went through so much. He'd have meltdowns, tantrums, write on things, kick the wall, hit the teachers, hit other little kids, do inappropriate things. He was hard to understand. You couldn't understand a word he was saying. And it's a process to get diagnosed, especially when your child is very young, 3 years of age. Nobody wants to assess them. Nobody wants to see them. They'll grow out of it, blah, blah, blah. Our son wasn't growing out of it. The director at Step by Step, she knew it. And as he turned 4, the concern grew. And then when he turned, he was almost 5, and the concern turned into, they've got to see him. And during this time, I'm fighting with everything I have in me to get somebody to see him. So I go through Child Find first. They're like, oh, he's definitely ADHD, but take him to a pediatrician. We don't think he's autistic, though. We don't think he's on the spectrum. Well, this was after them just sitting with him for 30 minutes in a small office with no distractions, no other children, nothing. Our son does very well one-on-one for the most part. Eye contact's really not very, very long, but he will show eye contact if you directly speak into him and you get his attention. But you have to be eye to eye like this. You can't be towering over him. You got to get down on his level and get your face into his face. Not too close because he don't like that, but. And so that's basically how they were sitting with him. And so, yeah, they had his attention for the most part. They had to redirect him a lot. That's where the ADHD comes in. Anyway, so the teachers filled out their assessments. And even with what they said and what my husband and I said, they were like, nah, he's not on the spectrum, blah, blah, blah. something in me, a mother's instincts are always right, people. And I knew I didn't feel normal, and I knew I had problems, and I always just thought it was ADHD. But I knew the things I was seeing in our son was not ADHD. Let me give you an example. For the first 4 years of his life, from the time he started in a toddler bed and into his big boy bed, our son would not get out of that bed until he physically saw my face or my husband's face. Would not. Didn't matter if he had to potty. He would not get out of that bed. He would not go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. He still will not go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. Even though we have a nightlight in his room, a nightlight in the hall, a nightlight in the bathroom, he will not get out of that bed in the middle of the night. My son is absolutely obsessed with the color blue. In his classroom, it's actually kind of funny. We had to get him some more crayons because his teacher told us, I don't know what Zayden did with all his crayons. And I was, what do you mean? Did he lose them? Did he break them? What do you mean? She's like, well, the only crayons he has in his box are blue crayons. He don't have any of the other colors. So I've been having to give him crayons. So, we bought him some more crayons, and she would give him one color at a time. When he was at our house to do homework, we could not give him a whole box of crayons because he would literally feel each crayon to decide which color he was going to use. And of course, after feeling 24 crayons in the box, what color would he pull out? The blue. Even though this worksheet says to color their apple red, he wanted to color it blue. So that was a challenge. So, worksheets that had multiple colors, we would look at the worksheet ahead of time. My husband was really smart, and he was like, we're just going to take those 3 colors, and he'll have to choose those 3 colors. And then it cut homework down from taking 2 to 3 hours down to an hour. Long story short, we finally got him seen by somebody. Took him to the Wolf Center, and Dr. Wolf definitely agreed that our son had ADHD. And he knew Zayden had something else. He felt it, but he wasn't confident enough to diagnose it. So for a year, Zayden's diagnosis from 4 years old to 5 years old was ADHD/other. He wasn't sure if it was OCD, he just wasn't sure. He was thinking OCD. Because Zayden would separate colors from his Legos, and he would build with the blue ones first, and then he would, mess with the other colors, and our son has sensory issues, all kinds of stuff. But he's very social, which is very unusual for someone who is autistic. They're not supposed to be social. So we kept getting, well, he's not autistic because he's too social. It's literally what they said to us. So we got Zayden on meds, and the impulsiveness and the aggressiveness got better. But then he started going down again. We upped the dosage, but it really wasn't making a difference. Zayden he would have tantrums. It was almost like he was being triggered. So I had called Dr. Wolf twice, 2 emergency phone calls, and finally the second time I called him, he was like, okay, we need to take this a step further. He needs to be assessed. I don't think he has autism, but let's go there and let's see. Well, the waiting list for Sacred Heart was just way too long. And we had been going through this journey for over 3 years, and I had it. So we had been waiting for over 3 months to get him seen at Sacred Heart. They canceled my appointment. Then I didn't hear from him for another month. So that was it. I was on Facebook, and I was just frustrated. And I joined the Pensacola autism page on Facebook. And I had seen that a mother was venting about Sacred Heart and waiting forever on the waiting list to get her child seen, and them counseling on her, and then having to wait several more months, and she was sick of it. And who does anyone know anyone else? So I got on there and I typed following you, let me know what you find out. And then I had wrote about Zayden's journey in a blog of mine on Facebook, and I shared it to that page, to her string, her Facebook string of comments, because I wanted to let that mother know, you're not alone. We're going through the exact same thing. And then I can't even tell you who it was. It might have been the head person of Spectrum House. I can't remember who the person was, but they tagged this man on the post and said, get a hold of this person. So I clicked on that person's name, and it was an office called Intricate Minds. And I sent him a very long message, and I sent him a copy of Zayden's story. And I said, you know, I don't know what insurance you take. That was another thing. I was having insurance issues. I'm like, I'm spending over $600 a month on insurance, and I can't even get my son seen because no one's in the network and nobody wants to see a 5-year-old. But he, because of the Lord, praise God, was willing to take a look at Zayden, and he was within my insurance. So we took him, and it took, called him one day, and literally the next day I heard back, and literally not even a week, Zayden was sitting in that office. So we went through several assessments. One was a observation, one was a behavioral, and then one was a questionnaire of like 150 questions. I hate questions. I don't like questions. And I'm ADHD, so it was a nightmare to fill that thing out. And a week later, we got the results. Come to find out, our son is definitely ADHD, and they used to call it Asepergers, but now it's just high-functioning autism. Basically, what that means is he's high up on the spectrum. But as far as I'm concerned, he's an ASD, because that's really what it is. They just don't use that term anymore. It was a relief to get the diagnosis. I went and met with the therapist, the clinician, not therapist. Well, he is a therapist. The clinician. He's an autistic specialist, clinically licensed for autism to diagnose it and treat it. I say treat, but coach it. I don't know. I don't like the word treat, because you can't heal yourself from autism unless God does it. It's a characteristic. It's the way your brain is wired and built. Just like ADHD. You can't. I remember when the doctor told me that my oldest daughter has ADHD as well, and I remember him telling me, oh, she'll grow out of it. Guess what? She didn't grow out of it. She still has it, and I very much have adult ADHD, and it's severe. It impacts my life on many levels. My life is very difficult. It's a struggle every day. So during my interview, with Mr. Sanchez, while he was telling me Zayden's diagnosis and answering my questions, he stopped and he looked at me and he said, Let me know if I'm out of line, but you know, I've been observing you and your husband while you've been here waiting for your son and watching your cues as we talk, and I see markers. Well, my mind's going to markers. And so I'm not understanding what this guy's saying. And so I was like, what do you mean markers? Like, what do you mean? He's like, signs. I'm like, you see signs of what? He's like, would you be willing to be assessed for autism? I looked at him. I'm like, well, my husband's the one that we're not sure about his background because, you know, he was adopted, blah, blah, blah. He's probably the one that really needs to be assessed because there's no autism in my family ever recorded. Matter of fact, there's no ADHD that I know of on my family side ever recorded, except for now. I think I have a cousin who has a couple of children that might have it. And I didn't get diagnosed with ADHD until I was like in my 20s, and that was because I sought help. Although I don't really remember much about that, and I don't have it in writing anywhere that I have it. He's like, well, you probably need to have that fixed. So I can also do a reassessment for that. I said, okay, can't hurt, you know. I said, I know there's a lot of issues going on with me and have been for years, and I just always thought it was my ADHD and I was just not normal, and you know, there was not going to really be any answers. And so I went through about 3 weeks worth of assessments that I'm glad to be done with, and I never want to ever go through that again. It was very awkward and uncomfortable. I did not like it. It was way too many questions, over 150 questions on paper, and we're not going to discuss how many questions there were in the interviews. And then the observation consisted of me trying to relax and being stared at for 15 to 20 minutes. Let's just say I did not sit in one spot, and I was not relaxed. So I tested positive for high-functioning autism. And he warned me that there will be people that will accept the diagnosis and be caring and accepting and loving, and that there will be people that will reject the diagnosis and say it's not true and they diagnosed you incorrectly. I'm going to tell you why. It's not because those people are horrible. Just heard my son. Okay. It's not because my son's going to the bathroom. He's so funny. Boys are more apt to be diagnosed with autism than girls. There are more boys diagnosed than there are girls. But here's why. I don't think it's because boys actually have it more, or at risk more. And I'll tell you why, because of what I've learned so far. Boys who are on the spectrum, their characteristics are different in a lot of ways than girls. Girls are master mimickers. They will mimic their peers so that they will fit in and not be noticed. I am a master at that. My friend from way back in the day, Uriah, will tell you. She never could understand. I could get along with anybody, didn't matter who they were, didn't matter what walk of life they were.